Hey, this is AJ Hartley, novelist, Shakespeare professor, baby metal fan. I haven't done a baby metal video for a little while. Um, I, I I was struggling to see if I had anything else to say about the second album, and I suspect this will be my last video, at least on this album. Whether I do more from Metal Galaxy, we shall see. But and obviously, I'm talking about Tales of the Destinies. I'm going to try to keep it short, though I always say that, and it never works. Um, but yeah, I hope you like it. So this recording is from the Tokyo Dome performance. There, I've cut the first minute or so, which is mostly sort of stage effects, lasers, and atmospherics in the background, and then we get this added voiceover.
Seconds on counter. Neil Armstrong has just reported back. It's been a real smooth countdown. We passed the 50-second mark. Power transfer is complete. We're internal power. We're going to actually vehicle at this time. 5, 4, 3, 2.
Okay, so obviously we're counting down to the start of the song itself, but it's an interesting choice, isn't it, to use the first moon landing soundtrack from the first moon landing to cue the song up. And obviously I don't want to preempt what we're going to say, but it's fairly self-evident. This is a song about aspiration, and about defying what is expected of you, right? And I think, when you think about the moon landings, it was one of those things that, very shortly before it happened, people didn't believe it was possible. And so it's one of those it's an American example, but in a sense it's a global example of humankind stepping beyond its traditional confines, literally, physically, in order to broaden its horizons and its reach, which in a sense is what the song is about. Okay, before the lyric starts, I just want to say, there are a bunch of reactions on YouTube to this song, most of them by self-confessed instrumentalists of one kind or another. And they all say the same thing. It's so progressive. And it is. But, just in case you don't know what that means, progressive doesn't necessarily mean radical democratic socialist. Progressive in the sense of progressive rock, which is a form of rock music that came out of the 60s and 70s, and was an outgrowth. It's sometimes called art rock. It manifests as a fairly self-conscious form of rock music, which is attempting to be more than conventional pop and rock, breaking away from sort of the formulaic structures of rock and pop songs. Often it's borrowing from other forms. It's essentially quite eclectic as a form. So it dips into jazz, to a certain extent into a sort of classical music sort of paradigm, not so much in its imitation of classical sound, but in its operatic reach. Its tendency to have movements within a song, or extended guitar solos, or instrumental work of one kind or another, or using instruments that are not typically associated with rock music. And I'm particularly thinking of bands like King Crimson. The Court of the Crimson King is one of the sort of anthemic prog rock albums, though, in a sense, I think you could make the case that even some sort of, you know, more mainstream pop and rock from the 60s, from the late 60s, including the Beatles and the Doors and the Beach Boys, were in their own way pushing away from the limits of a traditional um, rock and roll verse chorus bridge chorus kind of structure, and in terms of using new instrumentations, new recording techniques, layering sounds, all that sort of stuff, you know. So what else? Early Genesis, yes. Those sort of I'm thinking Rush in that Farewell to King's Hemispheres kind of uh, part of their I guess early career. Um, um, Jethro Tull, I think a band like Hawkwind is at the sort of heavier rock end of the progressive scale, but it has that sort of some of those fantasy components, some of that sort of sci-fi, um, anti-pop kind of influences. And conventional wisdom says that it was this kind of music that punk was responding to in the late 70s and pushing back against. And I think to a certain extent that's true, though it's interesting to see how many of those punk and new wave bands who survived beyond like 1979 gradually started to incorporate some of those sort of experimental prog rock kind of elements, even if they didn't actually sound exactly like progressive rock. One of my favorite bands, XTC, who would rail against Genesis and those kind of bands, but by the end of their career, they are doing some pop rock standard type stuff, but also other things that are much more experimental and non-mainstream. And I bring this up, and people always bring it up in terms of this particular song, because the instrumental work is so intricate. The shift in time signatures is a hallmark of progressive rock, and it's where rock becomes very crafted and very deliberate. It's a movement away from the sort of blues inspired, much more intuitive and organic kind of sound that you get in some rock music, into something which is much more artificial in a sense. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it in the Elizabethan way, in which art is a component of artifice, right? That it's the crafted nature of it that makes it so exciting and interesting and surprising. And I think you hear those time signature shifts, and it keeps you on the edge of your seat, because you don't know exactly where it's going to go, and it forces you to pay attention and listen. You can't sort of sit back and let a standard 4/4 time kind of not waltz, march over you, as it were. I guess that would be 2/4. But you know what I mean, right? That sort of predictable song structure and instrumentation that you get in conventional rock and pop. This doesn't allow you to do that. And so it has that sort of urgent and the sort of staccato shifts, the sudden turns in direction, that is a hallmark of progressive rock. Lyrically, I don't mean this as a criticism of progressive rock, but I think when you hear that, it's a little bit like being shot at. Those sudden sort of shifts and that again, that staccato kind of sound is a bit overwhelming and and quite sort of nervous, or it makes you nervous in a way, right? That there's it's very intense, and I think that's reflected in these first lyrics, right? The Unganai, Tsuitanai. We don't have any luck. We're not lucky. Kotai wa itsumo shikaranai shoganai. Our answer is always we can't help it. It can't be helped. So this is interesting, right? Because it sets the tone, and I think in some ways this song it has comparisons to something like Yaba, which I've already talked about, because the frame of the song is about a kind of negative pressure that things around you telling you you can't change anything. Things are bad because they're bad, you know, and you're in the middle, getting sort of ambushed by this, right? And I think we saw this in Yabat, the way that Sue is sort of flanked by these voices and then has to somehow sort of escape them or push through them. And I think this song does something similar, and it does it musically as well, right? But at this stage in the song, the emphasis with that sort of those shifts, those quick, abrupt changes, is part of that sense of being embattled, right? Of having all this stuff coming at you. 99999, meaning simply, no, 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 or never, never. It's one of those sort of generic negative words that can mean a lot of things, or no, right? And incidentally, it's interesting because the last video that I did was not a BabyMetal video. It was an Atarashi Gakko video, and about the song 999. And in a sense, it's actually quite similar. That because it's also about this sense of confusion, of being lost, of being embattled. Atarashi Gakko figures it specifically as a sort of modern youth culture issue. And their handle on the issue is to sort of celebrate that confusion and to recognize it as a sort of generative, formative part of what it is to be young and forging your own path. And that's where I think the BabyMetal song is, in some sense, similar. But the sense of being surrounded by negativity, right? And the negativity specifically that says, this is just the way things are. You're stuck. You can't do anything about it, right? Is this a specifically Japanese kind of cultural construct? I mean, I think versions of this exist everywhere in the world, particularly when you're a young person and you feel like you're constantly pushing against a glass ceiling of some sort, and the world is trying to contain you. Arajanai, Korajanai, is that it? That's not it. This is not it, right? Kotae wa doko ni? Where's the answer? Where's the solution? 999, and this time it kind of means nowhere. It doesn't exist, right? And then we shift, right? And this is where I think BabyMetal's solution to the problem is different from Atarashi Gakko, because for Atarashi Gakko, the journey through confusion is the point, right? The process is the product. For BabyMetal, because their self-image is more epic and fantasy in some ways, they have to see a kind of light at the end of the tunnel. So and shoot for it in the same way that the moon is the target of the rocket ship at the beginning. Yeah, great. So, all that sort of staccato switching back and forth shifts for a second, and we go into this much more melodic, much more, again, aspirational kind of vocally driven part where, and also we switch from Japanese into English, which is also really interesting, since English has already been prefigured in the video as the voice of the moon landings. This is one of the reasons I wonder if the sense of being stuck is being registered as a particular kind of Japanese phenomenon. Now, I'm not saying it's a negative presentation of Japan in which, the West or the US is somehow the solution, the way out, individualism and capitalism and all the rest of it, right? I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that in Japan, sometimes, as in any culture, in any country, other countries represent things because of the way that they are perceived, right? And I think in this case, there's a version of in I keep saying individualism, which is perhaps not right. A sense of being able to control your future and break out of the mold, which is in some ways, traditionally speaking, a more Western characteristic than it is a Japanese characteristic. So it makes sense to me that we switch briefly into English, which is, comparatively unusual for BabyMetal. But of course, this song is going to lead into The One, which is entirely in English, which is also interesting, or at least in the version performed here. I know there's a Japanese version as well. So don't worry. Sa umare kawaru. We're going to be reborn now. Countdown hajimete ikoyo. So let's start the countdown in the 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 0, right? Which is the sort of set me free first. 3, 2, 1, 0, which is the again the blast off, the sense of being liberated from Earth, right? If you want to sort of extend the space metaphor that we began with. I love this part of the song because this is where it soars, right? I mean, and I think again, it's that space flight, that sort of liberation, that the escape from all that earthbound negativity, and suddenly we take flight, and the melody takes flight, and it sort of reaches beyond all that sort of intricate jazzy back and forth stuff and becomes this sort of rousing, sort of anthemic melody line. Tomaranai, owaranai. It never stops. It never ends. Kagiri nai melody. Right. It's a limitless melody. It's an endless melody. Bokura wa furimiku nai. We're never gonna look back. Now and forever. Toa no memory, it's our eternal memory. The One will be with you. Warera ga the Destinies. Now, so the One, of course, is the name of both the band and the fan base, right? So it's this very sort of inclusive, we've talked about this before, this communal sense of identity. So part of what we're talking about here as the sort of liberating element is their music itself. And this is part of their sort of constant performance of sort of pulling everybody together under the umbrella of BabyMetal, right? But I think also, that we are the Destinies. And that's interesting, right? Because, of course, the Fates or the Destinies were figured as 3 women in classical Greco-Roman mythology, often sort of working the loom, spinning the thread of life and the way it weaves together. And in some ways, they were sort of even more powerful than the gods, not always, in that they sort of plot your life in advance. But destiny is a tricky concept, isn't it? Or in some ways it's a very simple concept, but it's a tricky thing to actually identify because destiny by definition means what will happen, not what might happen, not what is ordained to happen but can be avoided, right? You can't say, well, I was destined to get hit by a bus, but fortunately I saw it coming and managed to get out of the way. No, you weren't destined to get hit by the bus. Because if you were destined to get hit by the bus, you'd be hit by the bus. Because that's what destiny is, right? Destiny can only be read retrospectively. It's always too early to say you dodged destiny, right? So the idea of the song, I think, is really interesting because we begin with that sense of these sort of pressures of people around you saying you can't do this. This is not you're stuck. There's no way out. You're out of luck, and that's just the way it is. And then we start to we transcend and we say, well, okay, so we're going to push through anyway. We're going to follow our path. This is a very baby metal concept. We're seeing this all the way through the album. We're going to do our own thing. We're going to sort of act as our own saviors, right? And this is being extended to the audience of the song as something that we do together. And then the claim that we are the Destinies. Now, so if you take control of your own destiny, that's another way of saying you don't believe in destiny, right? Because if you believe in destiny, then you're controlled by forces outside yourself. So what the song is doing is playing with that idea, but offering you the capacity to become sort of self-transformative through your participation in this community and that sort of metal spirit, which they constantly talk about, which allows you to sort of transcend what you look like you're destined for, right? The things that society and culture has determined as your lot, but somehow you're able to escape that and become your own person, I guess, right? Can I just say, what? Right? So, and then again, this is simultaneously a confrontation with rock, but it's also a feature of progressive that they will sort of drop in something that seems to belong to an entirely different genre. In this case, it's what? Sort of ragtime, honky tonk, and the girls are doing this sort of Betty Boop type cute little dance step thing. What is going on here? I don't know. Um, I don't know. Is that one of is the cuteness one of the things constraining them, or is it one of their ways of escape? I could go either way on that. Um, I think that the choreo, and it's quite hard to see with the watermark on this, but the choreography is also quite interesting because it's very square. It's very blockish, and a lot of very sort of broad, stylized movements. Doesn't have the energy that a lot of their songs have, and there's this sense that as the sort of musical stuff is going on around them, exciting though it is, and intricate and brilliantly executed as it is, as it always is, it still feels to me a bit like in the Yaba song where there's a sense of constraint, you know, which they only escape on their own, on the sort of the big choral solo, chorus, choral chorus. Genius. Yeah, so that it's very mechanistic, and it's been talked about in a number of videos. That sense of the sort of the way that the puppetry seems to sort of influence some of their choreography, and that sense of being sort of controlled by something outside themselves, right? Which is a great metaphor for a song like this, where there's that sense of things that are trying to restrain you or constrict you. So, Damage and I. Now, you notice that in the subtitles that flash up, the English subtitles here, they seem to be using, I think it's Metal's translation, where he says, "Isn't it useless?" ? It's not useless! Exclamation mark. I guess that's plausible for damijanai, but the truth is, it's the same phrase, right? Repeated. So, isn't it useless or it's not useless are both viable translations of each phrase. But I don't see anything changing in the delivery or in the choreography to say question, negative question, optimistic answer. I think that this whole section is still in that sort of the negative sense of constraint, the stuff that's coming from outside yourself. In which case I would say it's useless, isn't it? Both times, right? Nai nai nai, and then the same thing, right? Murijanai, it's impossible, right? Don't you think it's impossible? Isn't it impossible? And then yume janai, yume meaning it's a dream, right? So getting out of this is impossible. It's a dream. It's a fantasy, and it can't be real, right? Nai 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 nai. Imaginai. Now. Getting out of this now. Is that possible? Can we do that? Probably not, right? But then we shift again. You see, again, that sense of constraint, right? They're quite static, and the motion is all upper body. And well, we've got this sort of battling guitar stuff over the top, and it has that sort of jazzy improvisational kind of feel to it, kind of, but it's also very insistent and aggressive. And now we start to open up the physical because we're moving towards that positivity. Upward motion. Pushing back. Big open stance. Okay, so yeah, so this is the positive side, right? Can't stop me now. Ima hajimaru, now it's beginning. Now I'm beginning, right? Big chance, nerate ikoyo. Let's shoot for the big chance, the big opportunity. Get ready, and then 3, 2, 1, 3. So, and then we're back into the countdown. But you see how that sort of transitions out of this sort of embattled sense, right? And then it sort of expands and moves up and out. So beautiful. Yeah, but it's such a well-crafted song, that for all its disparate parts, it gels as a whole really, really nicely, Tomaranai, owaranai, so again, it never stops, it never ends. Hatashi nai janai, it's an endless journey. Bokura wa hitori janai. Okay, that's interesting. Bokura meaning we, right? It's usually a male pronoun. Boku, but bokura is a first person plural. So we, hitori janai. Hitori means one, alone, right? So we are not separate. We're not isolated. And this is the sort of, I kept using the word individualistic before, and in a sense that's wrong, because what they're saying is you're not by yourself, right? We are a unit. And because we sort of participate, we share in the same things and the same struggles, the same anxieties, we become a single entity. We're not simply separate things. We are all together now and forever. Sorega destiny. That's our destiny. Sorega destiny. But, and then it says, the one will be with you. Warera ga the destiny. So we are the destiny. So that's our destiny and we are the destiny. So again, the two concepts sort of fold into each other in a way that ultimately denies destiny as an external force and puts the control of your own life and your own future in your own hands through communal identity resisting a different kind of larger oppressive communal identity, right? So we bond together as individuals. We share the things that excite us or define us in some ways. We come together as a group, and that drives us forward and allows us to live the lives that we want to live. And that's the song. And then we finish with this sort of transitional part, which leads into the one, this beautiful little melodic piano sound straight out of ex-Japan, right? It sounds just like something that Yoshiki would play. Yeah, that's sort of, that. It's melodic and emotive, but it has that sort of stately grandeur to it, slightly overblown. Very, very prog rock again, in a way. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. I want to keep this short. Plus, my hair looks ridiculous. Got to do something about this. All right. So yes, I'm going to leave it at that. Try to keep this short for once. So yes, as usual, like, comment, subscribe. I don't understand YouTube. I don't understand the algorithms. I don't understand what people want to watch and what they don't want to watch. As of last week, I think my most watched video is the Atarashi Gakko Otonna Buru song. Why? I don't know. And I did a couple of other Atarashi Gakko songs and nobody watched that video at all. So I don't understand how this works. So, if you have suggestions or comments, please make them and it'll feel like I'm actually talking to people rather than just howling into the digital void. Thank you. Talk to you soon.